The Seahawks opened the preseason with an exciting 24-13 win over the Vikings. Which players on offense, defense, and special teams improved their chances of making the roster the most in the preseason opening victory? We'll be breaking it all down in our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined for our latest Monday episode by my co-hosts, Rob Rang and Shawn Walli. A special thanks to all the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening out in Moses Lake, Washington, or in Huntsville, Alabama, we greatly appreciate your support. The Seahawks getting ready for their second preseason game coming up on Saturday against the Dallas Cowboys. But before we turn the page to that game, we're going to take one last in-depth look at Thursday's win over the Minnesota Vikings. We've got Monday Musings on offense, defense, maybe some special teams sprinkled in there as well. It's going to be an exciting, jam-packed episode. Well, let's get to it here. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks opened the preseason with a 24-13 comeback win over the Vikings. They fell behind 10-0 early, but thanks to Drew Lock and a number of rookies, both drafted and undrafted, Seattle was able to right the ship a little bit, come back and win the football game with a dominant second half performance. Let's talk about which players improved their chances of making the team the most, because that's really what matters this time of year. It's not about wins and losses. These games really don't count. You're 1-0 in the preseason standings, not a big deal, but you're looking to evaluate your football team. And Rob, this was a game where the rookies really shined. That's what you want to see, because this is where they get their reps, but not just the draft picks, the undrafted guys as well. Who stood out to you on offense and defense as players that boosted their chances of making the 53-man roster for the Seahawks?
Yeah, there's a couple of players from the Bay Area that I want to highlight here. Both of them were undrafted free agents. And, when I was fortunate enough to attend the Seahawks victory against the Vikings, and Corbin, there was 5 or 6 or 7 names that are kind of going through my head. And before we started recording today, we kind of started talking about who's going to talk about who. So I'm going to highlight 2 players, Jalen McKenzie, the offensive lineman from USC, and Jacob Sykes, the defensive lineman from UCLA, who had transferred actually from Harvard earlier in his career. And these are not necessarily the very top 2 players on my list, but they certainly were among the handful that checked the box as far as players that I think definitely helped their stock with Thursday night's victory over the Vikings. First off here with Jalen McKenzie, the big offensive lineman. He had started over 4 years at USC, but mostly at right guard and right tackle. And what I was encouraged by is how well he played at the left tackle position for the Seahawks. It's that type of positional versatility that is certainly going to be intriguing to Andy Dickerson and the Seahawks entire staff. And at 6'5", 315 pounds with long arms and light feet, again, this is a really intriguing guy. And a lot of people have focused in on the fact that he is the son of Reggie McKenzie and the Green Bay Packers, and the ties with John Schneider and all that kind of stuff. And I love the bloodlines conversation, but when it comes down to actually making an NFL team, you have to have the physical talent. And I thought that McKenzie did a nice job against a Vikings pass rush that was trying to, get after Drew Lock or Holt Nailers or whatever the case might be. So again, I thought that he had a nice performance. And then finally with Sykes, the defensive lineman from UCLA, as I mentioned, he previously played his college ball at Harvard. He transfers over to UCLA and has a pretty impressive performance. He's 6'3", 280 pounds. He's not quite as big and physical as some of the defensive tackles that Seattle already has on the roster, but he's a penetrator. And he is an interesting guy. He actually led the Seahawks defensive tackles in snaps against the Vikings, batted down a pass, had a quarterback hit, was just active. And again, considering the fact that defensive linemen are, basically worth their weight in gold in the NFL, I think the fact that he did get as many opportunities for the Seahawks as he wound up having, I think is a testament to the production that he's had for the Seahawks so far in the preseason. So to me, there are a number of players that we should be talking about in this show. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Corbin, as well as Shawn's. But those are two players that I think maybe won't get a lot of attention, but certainly should. I know that they are from the Seattle perspective.
Shawn, we're going to dish the mic over to you now with your players that improved their roster chances the most. And I know before the show that you were really excited because we were fighting over a few players on this, and you ended up getting both of your top picks on offense and defense. So I know you're excited to talk about both these players who had impressive games against the Vikings.
Maybe I should go buy a lottery ticket with getting these guys, but hard not to notice on offense. Jake Bobo, 6'4", 207 out of UCLA. He had 3 receptions, 55 yards, that touchdown. What an amazing move he put on the Vikings DB. You go to the other side of the ball, Jonathan Sutherland. Both these guys undrafted. Sutherland out of Penn State. He's played linebacker and safety, almost a Jamal Adams light, if you will. And he's a captain all 4 years at Penn State. What I really like about Sutherland is that Pete Carroll is taking notice. Pete Carroll is coaching him up one-on-one at practice, at training camp. And so that's got to be a good feeling for Sutherland. And he's doing really good things. He can be in the box like a Jamal Adams. He can be back on the defensive backside and help out deep. And Bobo is just, man, you ran a 4.99 40. That is not good on any level. We might even be able to beat that, guys. And
I can't. I already tried that, and I'm old with bulky knees now, but at least I tried.
Hey, the effort is there. And if a 4.99 still gets you on an NFL roster, his fundamentals are real good, and his smarts, knowing when to deke, when to do the double move. He's just a very smart receiver, and good things are happening for him. And I think the key for all of these undrafted guys is health, because you see a lot of guys on this roster that aren't practicing, that didn't play in the game because they're banged up, and that doesn't help their stock on this team.
Yeah, I think both those players, I've been talking about Bobo nonstop for the last week, so it was nice to hand off that baton to somebody else. But Jonathan Sutherland had a quarterback pressure, a QB hit in that preseason game, had a couple of nice plays in coverage as well. He's played some nickel corner. He's played linebacker. He's played safety. They're moving him all over the place. And Pete Carroll, that clearly is catching his eye with how much one-on-one attention he is giving this undrafted free agent out of Penn State. For me, I'm going to go with a couple names that have been pretty trendy. And on offense, Matt Landers, he had the touchdown to the end on the arm punt by Holton Ahlers. There's no other way to describe that play. Clearly just chucked it up. And I think Matt Landers got away with a little bit of offensive pass interference there. Actually, a lot of pass interference, pushing off on the corner. But he was able to show off his ability to adjust to the football and create after the catch with his speed, a 30-yard touchdown. And so that's obviously going to help him when, and as you mentioned, Shawn, you've got injuries galore. You've got a suspension for D. Esker. I mean, that receiver position, I'm sure we'll talk about it more later, but that is wide open for 4 or 5, maybe even 6 spots on the roster. So Matt Landers, every positive play he can turn in is going to help his chances, especially with the size and speed combination that he brings to the table. You don't see many 6'4" guys that run a 4.37 and can jump the way that he can. Now, I'm going to talk on defense. I'm going to try to limit this to 30 seconds. It's going to be really difficult for me because Levi Bell was the most impressive player that I watched in this football game on offense or defense. And I thought he played well when I was watching the game live. And then I watched the all 22, and my goodness, this kid was just jumping off the tape. Every play was in there. I couldn't stop watching it, whether it was getting upfield with speed rushes. He had a couple nasty bull rushes. I mean, this guy is built like a brick. He's short. He's stocky. He's got arm. He looks like he would be an interior defensive lineman with the build that he's got. but he's really quick. He's explosive. He had 6 quarterback pressures, a sack, and 3 QB hits in this game. He was all over the place. No, by the way, he had a tackle for loss against the run too. So he showed, hey, I'm not just a pass rusher. And the hard thing for Levi Bell, and we'll talk more about this later, that edge rushing group looks really solid from a depth perspective. So I don't know if he's still played his way onto the team, but he is now in that discussion. He deserves to be in that consideration. He's playing that well. And so those are the 2 guys for me, Landers and Bell, that I was impressed with. And I feel like they helped their chances of making this football team on Thursday. We're going to continue breaking down the preseason contest in depth. Monday Musings coming up next. We'll start on the offensive side of the football. What did Rob, Shawn, and I notice as we dove into the tape and took a closer look at Thursday's game? We'll be breaking it all down coming up next year on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. The official start of fantasy football drafting month. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy football and the best place for best ball. Best Ball Mania 4 is the largest fantasy football tournament ever, and you can also invite your fans to a private draft in order to bring in new users. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball and Underdog Fantasy. All you have to do is a live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. You don't have to worry about setting your lineup each week, which is a godsend for somebody like me that usually forgets week in, week out to do so. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. The largest fantasy football contest is back, and it's better than ever with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. You might be too late anyway. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with the promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code Locked On. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by Rob Rang and Shawn Walli. And a special thanks to all the 12s, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Everydayers, believe it or not, we are going to start transitioning into week 2 of the preseason tomorrow. We're going to be looking at where things stand in competitions on the offensive and defensive side of the football and start looking into Saturday's contest coming up against the Dallas Cowboys. You won't want to miss the episode. Let's get to our Monday Musings. First time of the year. This is one of my favorite segments we do on this show. We get a chance to look deeper into the previous game and talk about a few things that jumped out to us from Seattle's 24-13 win over the Vikings. And Shawn, I'm going to dish you the mic first here. We're going to make sure we spread the wealth here in terms of mic time. But looking at this football game from an offensive perspective for the Seahawks, they started really slow, but then they were able to turn things around late in the second quarter, had a really strong second half. What jumped out to you as far as a key takeaway on offense for the Seahawks coming out of this football game?
Well, the initial struggle was a bit of a shock, starting out slow, but they definitely were able to right that ship. And we've already talked about the receivers a little bit with Bobo, Landers doing good things. And the real big question there is, who's going to be that 4th, 5th receiver? Do they keep 5? Do they keep 6? We know the top 3. They're set in stone. They're not going anywhere. DK, Tyler Lockett, and JSN, definitely 1, 2, 3 right there. You saw that very first play go to JSN just to get his nerves out of the way, his cobwebs, get him into football mind and get him the ball, and he'll know what to do with it. And then he won't have to think quite as much. Get the ball in his hands, he'll react, make plays, and get those nerves gone. They did well at that, got him off the field, and he'll keep going. He's amazing. JSN's doing great things for this team. But with D. Eskridge now hurt and suspended the first 6 games, what's his worth? Yes, they took a second-round draft pick on him a few years back, but he has not lived up to that. And so that leaves the door ajar for guys like Landers, Bobo. Cody Thompson was injured, didn't play. Cade Johnson, the concussion, thankfully, he's okay. He's been out of the hospital, and hopefully all signs point to he'll be all right. He's still under concussion protocol, so we'll see if he's back for this weekend. Most likely not, since he's under concussion protocol. But What are they going to do beyond the top three? That's the big question. Will a guy like Aesop Winston Jr., who had the first touchdown of the game on that dime from Drew Lock, and of course, the Northwest knows he's a former Cougar, so that's great for people that are football fans here in the Northwest. So a lot of questions on who can take the lead and who will they keep. D. Eskridge, will he stick around? We will find out.
Yeah, that really is a big question now, because you would think if they were going to move on, they've known about the legal stuff since February and they haven't moved on. But now you've got another injury and the suspension. So it creates a major void with that fourth, fifth, sixth receiver spot for the Seahawks. And you've got a number of guys that are competing for that. And I thought this was a huge game for Cody Thompson, and he didn't play. So who knows what that means? Maybe he's ahead enough. The Seahawks were like, hey, we know what you can do. We've had you around for a few years. We're not going to force the issue. But I thought he was a player that really would have benefited from the chance to get those reps in this game. You mentioned the dime that Drew Lock threw to Aesop Winston on that touchdown. And Rob, those are the kind of throws that just entice you when you watch Drew Lock. And yes, there was one interception in this game. And then going back and watching it, I initially thought it was a really bad read, but then going back and watching the all 22, I still don't know if I would have thrown it necessarily, but I can see what he was able to see there with Matt Landers downfield trying to get the football to him. The ball got tipped. You take that pass out of the equation, even when Seattle struggled early, Drew Lock was throwing the ball well. He was playing with poise, and it seems like he is doing a better job of taking care of the football, at least from what I've seen at practice and now in this preseason game.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to basically make the argument that Drew Lock just, basically checked every box the Seahawks are asking him to check. Now, I do not want this to come off as I think that Drew Lock is making any type of real push to be Seattle's starter. This is Geno Smith's team. Let's be clear about that. But I do think that if you want to compete for a Super Bowl, we are seeing quarterbacks drop like flies all throughout the NFL. You have to have a quality backup quarterback. Yeah. And I think that Drew Lock and his experience, his talent, frankly, I think that's the biggest reason why the Seahawks were able to pull away in this game, because you saw Minnesota and their struggles with Nick Mullins and certainly with the rookie from BYU, that Jalen Hall, that they just there wasn't the consistent big plays. And one of the things that Shawn mentioned, it was a dime, that touchdown to Aesop Winston. I mean, the touchdown to Jake Bobo, and it was a great route by Bobo, but it was also a very accurate ball. If that ball is not thrown accurately, that's a possible pick six going back the other way. So I thought that that Drew Lock did a nice job of showing some aggression, but also showing precision, and doing so with a pretty limited receiver core, because as we talked about, D. Eskridge goes down on the very first play of the game, the kickoff. He goes down, and obviously Cade Johnson goes down as well. Those are two of your primary slot receivers. And so suddenly, the Seahawks offense is pretty much hamstrung. They've got two wide receivers on the outside in Jake Bobo, who, as we talked about, 4.99, Matt Landers, who is very limited route runner at this point. And then you got a couple of guys that aren't really used to playing the slot. And so to me, it's a tip of the cap to Drew Lock that he had the day that he had. 17-24 for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns. The pick, as you mentioned, Corbin, was tipped at the line of scrimmage. I thought that he had a nice performance. I thought that Shane Waldron did a nice job of changing the way that they may have called that game based on the limited slot receiver, potential or slot receiver options that they had at that point. That to me is exactly what you're looking for from a backup quarterback. Be able to manage the game when the game requires you to do so. So adjusting. I think that Seattle had a much more aggressive mindset entering the game, but the struggles with the receivers just getting themselves open. I thought for the Seahawks to win that game when they initially got kind of punched in the mouth a little bit, I thought was, again, a very encouraging sign for Drew Lock.
You know what I was also encouraged about? The guys that were snapping to Drew Lock and just the young offensive linemen in the interior in general. Oluwatimi and Anthony Bradford. Now, it's been a little bit of a different situation for those two guys in training camp. Oluwatimi, even though Evan Brown has had the edge, he's the starter right now. with 2 preseason games left to go. I have been impressed by what I've seen from Oluwatimi on the practice field. Bradford, it's been kind of the opposite. I haven't been impressed with his play. He's missed a practice, and he's had a hard time getting snaps. He hasn't had snaps with the first team. He's been exclusively the second team offense. And yet in this game, you got to see what the Seahawks liked about both of these players. With Oluwatimi, you got to see the ability to manage the huddle with the offensive line, to handle his line calls. I saw him down in the field. He was pointing things out, both in the run and pass game, getting his teammates in line, and he didn't give up any pressures on 27 pass protection reps in this game. So he has been carrying over what he did in college to the NFL so far. He has been outstanding in pass pro. Run blocking was a little bit more of a mixed bag, but I still thought he had some really nice plays in the run game. Bradford laid out one of the best pancakes you are going to see. I am surprised that the player is still not getting scooped off the Lumen Field turf by getting slammed down there by Bradford. So you saw that pure power from the 330-plus pound guard. There were some bad plays in pass protection where his inability to use his athleticism and practicality as an offensive lineman. We saw the great off-the-charts testing. It doesn't always show up, though, on the field. He struggles at times blocking outside of a phone booth, and that showed up a couple times. So he's still got to work on that. Can you get the athleticism to translate to the footwork and being able to handle interior rushers in the NFL? But overall, I thought it was a positive step forward for Bradford, who quite frankly, has been underwhelming in these first couple weeks of training camp, but getting a good preseason effort out of him, especially in the run game. Oluwatimi, I thought, played well enough to earn some first-team reps so that you can really make this a competition as it should be. So I thought overall that the young lineman in the interior played well. McKenzie played well. I thought Stone Forsythe struggled a little bit at the tackle position. Curhan, I thought, looked decent. So overall, I think there's a lot of positives to take by the way that the young offensive lineman played for the Seahawks in this football game. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under who you think is going to hit the first home run. It's all in the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host tandem, Rob Rang, as well as Shawn Walli. A special thanks to all the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Let's switch gears now to our Monday musings on the defensive side of the football. And Shawn, I'm going to be giving you the mic again here first because we got to give the newcomers some special privileges here on Locked On Seahawks. But Shawn, let's talk defense and what jumped out to you coming out of this 24-13 preseason win over the Minnesota Vikings.
Well, I'm just very curious what this team is thinking and going to do at safety. We know they have Julian Love, Quandre Diggs ready to rock. They will be the starters. Jamal Adams, does he have an impact this season? Does he get back? Can he stay healthy? That's always been the big thing with him here in Seattle is his health. Now, they've moved Kobe Bryant to safety / nickel at times. Kobe played safety 1 year in college, so it's there in his muscle memory somewhere, and he did a decent job on Thursday night against Minnesota. Seattle's got Joey Blount, Jonathan Sutherland that I talked about earlier, the 6th-round pick, Jarek Reed. So they have some depth, but the question is, can these guys play? Are these guys quality enough to make an impact if they get their shot? Because we know injuries happen. Diggs and Love, can they be counted on through 16, 17 games? Most likely, but okay, look at what happened last season. Game 1, down goes Jamal Adams. Geez, if I can find his name. Ironically, tackling a quarterback in Denver. So, D'Eskridge on Thursday, his injury on the kickoff. So injuries can happen in a flash, and you have to have that depth. But the question is is that safety room talented enough to hold up to one or two guys going down with either a serious injury or even, hey, you're going to miss a week or two? Bryant, we know he's a good corner. Can he be a good safety? That's a big question. And if he can, that's going to be huge moving forward for this safety room on the back end of this defense.
Yeah, the safety position is one of the more fascinating competitions in terms of the backups. And there's also that wild card in Jamal Adams, who still is not off the PUP list. And I think it's coming. I think it's going to be happening here in the near future. But until you get him back in the field and see what he looks like, that is a huge question mark, a huge cloud hovering over this safety group. And then Joey Blunt's trying to work back from, luckily, what is not near as bad of an injury as it initially looked. No severe damage to his back. Jarek Reed II, I thought, played much better on Thursday night than what I've seen on the practice field, so I think was a positive step for him. Sutherland, as you mentioned, had a pretty solid preseason debut as well. Rob, you were looking at those safeties, but maybe from a little different perspective, maybe from a more big picture standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things I was fascinated by is just how is Seattle going to line up? We've heard so much in the offseason about this 3 safety look, and going back a couple of years ago now. And, with Jamal Adams, I mean, he is a pretty unique player in that he almost plays more like a linebacker than a safety. And, Pete Carroll talked about it, that they kind of tinkered with the defense to put him in position to be successful. And, it was one of the things that Shawn mentioned earlier that I think that really stood out, and I think that our listeners should be paying attention to, is this whole idea of Jonathan Sutherland, the undrafted free agent from Penn State, being almost like a Jamal Adams light. And I 100% agree. To me, was the way that they used Sutherland against the Vikings in the preseason game is exactly what I think that they are going to try to use Jamal Adams as more of a what I call a defensive eraser, a guy that can kind of move all over the field, but definitely be attacking the line of scrimmage at all times if possible. To see how often Seattle used a 3 safety look against Minnesota's starting offensive alignment, to me, is really interesting, because we know Kevin O'Connell is the head coach at Minnesota. This is a team that's very, very aggressive. That's often going to have a 3 receiver look. And that's the way that most NFL teams are running now. So to see Seattle use that with a 3 safety look, that basically means you only have one true off-ball linebacker on the field most of the time. In this case, it was John Radigan. Obviously, there'll be Bobby Wagner when the regular season gets going. But to me, that was what was intriguing, is how Seattle lined up. And to Shawn's point about the safety talent, I really think that Seattle does have that talent. I think there's enough bodies there and good football players there. I certainly was expecting Jarek Reed or a Kobe Bryant to be the headliner of this newfangled kind of safety look of the players that were playing. But it was Sutherland that was the one that stood out to me. So again, I was encouraged by Seattle's depth at that spot, and encouraged by the aggression of this new alignment that they're going to be using. I think that it should be able to make Seattle's secondary once again a strength, just like those Super Bowl runs.
In preseason games, as all of us know, scheme is going to be pretty vanilla. You're not going to be game planning for the Dallas Cowboys in week 2 of the preseason, but I did think that it was a bit revealing to see how many sets that they had, 3 safeties on the field, even without Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, and Julian Love playing in this game. They're still mixing a lot of these guys in the lineup to try to find ways to get them on the field. And it seems like nickel and dime, that's going to be the way to go as far as base defense for the Seahawks at this point. The other thing schematically that jumped out to me, everybody who listens to this show knows how excited I get seeing bare fronts. The Seahawks kept finding different ways to adjust their line before the snap to get into those bare fronts with 5 defensive linemen. So that got me excited. I'm hoping to see a lot of that this year from the Seahawks with this hybrid 3-4 scheme. As far as what jumped out to me, I'm always going to be somebody that tries to look at both sides of the coin. That's just the way I'm programmed. And looking at linebackers, both inside and outside linebackers, to me, that was truly a mixed bag coming out of this game. Now, I mentioned Levi Bell earlier. That was one of the positives, seeing a guy like that coming from the USFL, just dominating at times off the line of scrimmage, off the edge, getting after the quarterback with 6 pressures. I thought that Tyreek Smith had some good snaps in this game. Boye Mafe, as I mentioned on our post-game show, Boye Mafe was my defensive game ball winner. I thought he was outstanding the couple drives that he played in that football game. And Derek Hall didn't have the stats, but if you were watching the all 22, he was very disruptive. So you are seeing an outside linebacker group. They didn't have Uchenna Nwosu or Darrell Taylor in this game. You get those two guys with Mafe, with Derek Hall, with Tyreek Smith, maybe Levi Bell. I mean, he is playing himself into consideration there. That group looks like it has a lot of depth, and there's a lot of upside, a lot of players that are under 25 years old at that position group. So I think they've got a lot to be excited about with that group. On the flip side, at inside linebacker, I thought Devin Bush looked pretty good the handful of snaps that he played in this game. You know that he's experienced. He started a lot of games, but John Radigan really struggled. I know that the raw stats show otherwise, but he missed at least 3 tackles in this game. And the second drive where the Vikings went down and got a field goal, there were 3 plays there where he was out of position. The pursuit angles were not good. He did not look like a guy to me that is positioned right now to be able to handle playing middle linebacker in an NFL defense in the regular season. Now, he rebounded from that. He made a few nice tackles against the run, but I've got some concerns there. Ben Burkervin, it's a great story. I didn't see anything that suggested to me, though, that he's going to be ready to play defense in a regular season game if he's needed. I didn't see that in the limited action. Patrick O'Connell, the undrafted rookie out of Montana, made some splashy plays. There were also a few bad plays mixed in there as well. So without Vi Jones getting the reps out there being injured, to me, that is a big concern, is if you do have some injuries with your experienced guys at the top, you don't get Jordan Brooks back for week 1. There's a number of variables here, but I have some growing concerns about the depth at that inside linebacker position. So it's 2 totally different ends of the spectrum. Outside linebacker, the depth looks better than I anticipated. I'm really excited about the upside of that group, how young it is, the pure talent they've got there. Inside linebacker, I really like the starters, the experienced guys they have. But if you have an injury or two and you're forced to throw one of these other young guys in, I have major concerns about what that does to this defense. And maybe that's why we're seeing all those 3 safety looks, because Pete Carroll knows, hey, this is where we're going to be better at this year. Get those safeties on the field, the ones that function like linebackers. And we're going to be better off than some of these younger guys that we currently have on the roster. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. You can follow Shawn at Shawn_Walli, WALLI. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up on our Tuesday show, going to be looking at competitions that are still ongoing at Seahawks camp, where things stand at center, cornerback, safety, a number of different positions, and much more. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.